that we still haven't made a theme song, so we make our own theme song with our mouths. Hello, acapella. Yeah, here we go. The reason we do this is we want to grow together right where we are. So if this is your first time joining us or listening on our podcast, we're basically journeying through books of the Bible in bite-sized portions. You know what I mean? That way, the goal is that as we do this, one, we'll look at maybe some of the harder texts, which we've had to do in the book of Mark. But two is we're going to just grow and hopefully take something away just from a little bit of scripture. So I'm here with Braden, our worship pastor, and Naomi, our youth pastor, and you guys know me. And we're in my office. So if the setting looks a little bit different, it's because I like this place. This place is home.
Comment below as to which setting you like more.
Oh, yeah.
Vote the other one.
If you like the front or the office, I like this one, especially on a cold day. So if you've got a Bible, open it up to Mark chapter 12. We're going to finish this story. Last week we had a really tough text with Jesus bringing up a psalm where David said, the Lord declared to my Lord. He's like, all right, so have David, the Messiah is the son of David. How do we get here? We're going to pick up in verse 38. We're going to read all the way to the end. Here's what it said. Jesus also said in his teaching, beware of the scribes who want to go around in long robes and who want greetings in the marketplaces, the best seats in the synagogues, the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and say long prayers just for show. These will receive harsher judgment. Now, verse 41, sitting across from the temple treasury, he watched how the crowd dropped money into the treasury. Many rich people were putting in large sums. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 tiny coins worth very little. Summoning his disciples, he said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others, for they all gave out of their surplus, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. All right, so here we go. Tight text. Jesus warns about the religious leaders, which is actually a pretty consistent theme throughout the Gospels. And then from there, he goes into this scene where he's watching people give. And there's this widow who comes in and puts in the term is 2 tiny coins. What are you guys seeing in this text?
Tag you're in.
You're in.
Well, first, I mean, the underlying theme in all of our, or most of our stories that we've been going through is God's standard versus human standard.
Okay, that's good.
You know, I mean, you look back at, you know, you without sin cast the first stone. You know, by their standards, they're going to stone her to death because of, you know, she was caught in her sin. But since their sin wasn't exposed, you know, they felt like they had the right to do that. And so again, it's God's standard versus our standard with this as well. No, I mean her 2 coins that added up to a penny, according to this, wasn't going to go a long way as far as human standards of buying things.
Yeah.
You know, but God or Jesus at the time was not worried about that. He saw her heart. He saw her heart, and he said no. He said she gave way more than any of them because that's all she had. You know. And that's God's calling for our life. It's not to give out of abundance, but to give out of our heart.
Yeah, that's good. That's something I think about all the time because I'm always like, I want a big house. And like my excuse is always to like, I can have youth kids over. Yeah. But it's like, why should we be having kids over now if that's really my heart in a little 2-bedroom?
That's right.
House, you know.
That makes me think of like when God says like, okay, to you who's good with much more will be added to you. So it's like basically, are you maximizing what God is giving you right now? Because the other half of that is to you who's bad with little, the little that you have will be taken away. Yeah. You're like, well, that doesn't sound fair.
Well, look at the talents.
I was like, yeah, except for everything that you have is on loan. Really, it's you have it because God gave it or God opened the door. So if you want increase, basically maximize what you have and trust that God will. I want to be careful in how I say that because I don't want that to be like a health and wealth, prosperity type thing. But that is what the scripture says. If you're good with much more will be added to you.
Yeah.
Look at the parable of talents.
I like to think of percentages whenever I think about this story with the widow who gives her like because I think some of us might read it and think like, okay, well, like the billionaire is obviously giving thousands of dollars or something like that. And, you know, so in our heads we're like, well, that's still a lot. Like, I'm not mad that they're giving. But I think, like, if we think of it as, like, a percentage of, like, okay, well, the billionaires are only giving, like, 5%. Whereas this widow is probably giving, like, 75%. Like, she's giving a lot of what she has. So I think when we think of it and we put it in the perspective of, like, numbers, the percentages, you're like, well, she's giving a lot of her money.
Yeah.
Even though it's 2 cents. And yeah, like, again, what you said, just like the intentions of the heart matter. Motives matter. Motives super matter. Super duper.
Well, in the first half of that text, he warns, the people that are blessed or given more, that they are going to be judged harsher. They're going to be greater. They will receive the greater condemnation.
So there's something interesting about that. Because, like, okay, verse 40, he says, they devour widows' houses and they say long prayers. So basically, the scribes that he's talking about, like, they take advantage of widows. Well, okay, so.
It's sad.
Yeah, it really is.
Really sad.
But, so now, remember, we talk about this, not every subtitle change and not every chapter change is a separation of thought. So just because there's a subtitle doesn't mean it's a separate scene, a separate day, or a different idea. So imagine that. Okay, the scribes, Jesus just warned and said that the scribes, they devour widows. So you talked about it in the equivalent of a penny. The coin that they had, it was called a lepta, and it was 1/64 of a denarius, which a denarius was 1 day's wage. So she put in two leptas. Well, the Jewish law required a minimum gift of 2 leptas. So the law that they were holding them to, talking about scribes devouring widows, like, she's literally giving all that she has. And I would propose that it's less about the law and more about her commitment to God.
Yes.
So for them, for everybody else, it's like, it's really goes to motives. All right, we're giving, I know we're supposed to give, but after I've paid everything else off, I'm going to give what's left. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what Jesus is referring to when he says they gave out of their surplus. Is basically the modern day way of saying it is they paid their mortgage, they paid their car payments, they paid their student loans, they set aside the money that they want to use to go out on dates and eat and buy the things that they want, and with whatever was left, that's what they gave. Mm-hmm. The widows was the opposite. It was, man, this is what God calls us to do, so I'm going to do it, even if it took everything from her. So we were talking about different perspectives in which we see this. Naomi, share what you were saying, like.
I think about the scripture a lot. Like, it kind of convicts me about being, like, more generous. And we had a professor, and kind of take this with some discernment, but he was always like, give until it hurts. Because, like, if I'm wealthy and I'm giving you, like, $20, like, it's kind of whatever, right? Like, it's kind of, like, no big deal. But if I'm, if I only have $100 in my bank account and I give you 50, like, that's a lot. And so he would always say, give until it hurts. And so, like, but there's also some wisdom in it, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't,
there's a balance.
Like, don't give your rent money, make sure your family has a house over their head and stuff like that. But
I think, so let's think about that. Like, I think there's a wise way to budget. Like, the way that we look at finances is giving, living, saving. Right? Giving, living, saving. Most people, they're like, live. I learned the average American
survive.
The average American can afford a $400 emergency, and so they live basically. 2 Corinthians talks about it this way. He's like, to him who supplies bread and seed. Well, seed is for tomorrow. You have to plant seed. Mm-hmm. So seed has to grow, and bread is for today. Yeah. But most people eat their seed, so when an emergency happens, they have nothing for tomorrow. Yeah. But giving, especially financially, I love it because in religious circles, we're like, oh, I give my time, I give my energy. And those are things that we do give, right. But they're very specific things. For example, the scribes, the reason that they would receive gifts is because they, when they allotted or they separated the land among the tribes of Israel, the religious leaders, the Levites, they didn't get a portion. So because they didn't give a portion, each tribe had to tithe, and that's what was the Levi's land. Does that make sense? So the tithe took care of the priests, and it was designed also to help take care of the needs of the people as they were guiding the people. Mm-hmm. Right? So, you can give time, you can give talent, but God does call us specifically to give money.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I think the other reason he does it is so that we don't become so attached to it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
he talks about structure and giving your first fruits.
Yeah, so you were talking about that and the idea of farming. Braden's if you didn't know, even though he looks like a lumberjack, he was a farmer.
Yes. So in the farming world, you get paid once a year, or depending on how many different crops you have, but once a year you sell your crop. But back in the day, Jesus talked about giving your first fruits. And what that means is, just like what we were talking about, structure. You don't give after you have paid for everything, after you have paid your expenses for tractors and seed and fertilizer and all that good stuff. It's as soon as you get that money, you give your 10%, because that's what he's called us to do.
Yeah.
And that way there's no confusion, there's no problems on how much you need to give. If you can give it, because it's all there, you have 100%, you give 10%. That's it. With the rest of it, 90% of it's yours. That's still a large portion, if you ask me.
Yeah.
If you got 9 out of 10.
Depending on your spending habits.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But again, that comes, the wisdom kicks in and the balance. So, that just usually I see a lot of parallels with farming and how Jesus calls us to live our lives. So
my conviction, so I love yours, was to give until it hurts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yours was the amount. My conviction was the order.
Mm-hmm.
My conviction when I read this is to give first. So when we talk in those categories, live, give, save, it should be give. I think it should be give, set aside your seed, save, and then live on.
I was about to say, aren't you a Dave Ramsey person?
I do like Dave
Okay,
Ramsey.
so if you ever have a question about Dave Ramsey, you can find my husband, because Dawson is all about Dave Ramsey. But I think even Dave Ramsey, who's like a money guy, he sets it in that where like you should give first and then save and then live. And that comes down to discipline too, like, you know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
So we'll end up by wrapping up with this. We've been about 15 minutes in. Why do you think God calls us to give? In your perspective, one short answer, why would God call us to give, especially financially?
Because he's so generous.
Okay, that's really good. I like that.
So
It's all God's money, and I think one of my favorite things I've heard is you can't outgive God.
Yeah, that's good. That is really good.
That's good.
I think if we're reluctant to give, what we're saying is, I'm my provider, not God.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when we give, when we learn to be generous, that's when we really see God as Jehovah Jireh, the one who provides. You know what I mean? So, and I think in this is why Jesus would praise her, because she's really going to have to depend on God for her provision. So any final thoughts?
Stay humble. Stay good.
Stay humble, stay smart. Well, here's what I would say is, when it comes to your heart, giving is a hard issue. If you're reluctant to give, ask the reason why. You know what I mean? Jesus praises the woman who didn't give because of the law, but gave because she trusts in God. And because of that, she's the one that is forever going to be told. I mean, realistically, think about it. She made the Bible. You know what I mean? Like, if there's a cool book to make in a Middle Eastern time period, it would be the Bible. And she made it as a good example. The scribes, who were the religious leaders, made it as a bad example many times. She made it as a good example. So be generous. If we're followers of God, like what you said, we give because God gave first. Yeah. Let's be generous, because when we are, we shine. And then when we shine, we actually point people back to God and His generosity. So that's it for today. Man, we hope that blessed you. We hope it encouraged you. And realistically, I'm going to be real, I hope it challenged you a little bit. The reason we do this is we want to grow together right where we are. We'll be back again next Wednesday at the same time. We hope you have an amazing week.
Bye.